Hello, I'm live. So this will be an interesting one because I think a lot of people are sick. A lot of my friends are sick, and a lot of other people are struggling with different things. I just did a marathon, so I'm back from that. But if I just have to, maybe we'll end early. But if we have to chat um, about random mental health stuff that I make up, not that I'm making anything up, because I'll be given evidence based stuff. But if I just kind of decide a topic and kind of spitball from there, we'll still do this. I didn't do it last week because I had a really bad migraine, and so I'm, doing the best I can to try to keep this thing going. So, rules for the chat: if we have people logging in today, we've got somebody. Um, is that you can ask about any mental health related stuff. We are focusing on mental health stuff, although a lot can be related to that. So people sometimes bring up conversations about God, and we can talk about that a little bit. But from a mental health perspective, um, we can't guarantee any anonymity stuff. I won't necessarily call out like who's saying what and who they are and whether they're clients or things from their life. But at the same time, it is viewable to anyone what questions you're asking. So please keep that in mind as you chat about it. But this is an unscripted conversation about mental health. And that's conversations that I think we should have more and more. So, with that said, so we're just going to start right in. Two conversations. Hopefully, I'm not getting sick myself. I've been around a lot of sick people. But like I said, I'll probably just have this one be a little bit shorter if we don't get going too crazy with the questions. So, I'm going to talk about the feeling when you don't feel like you're making progress. And this is definitely something that can happen in every asset, right? So you can have it where you're feeling that financially, you're just putting out more money than you're taking in, and you're just getting further and further into debt. It can feel like that when it comes to your relationship stuff. It can feel like that when it comes to physical stuff and training. And it's a really terrible feeling when we feel like no matter all the effort we're putting in, things are not progressing. Of course, one of the things that we do often when we feel like that is the way we're looking at it is very short term. So, we could go take a very extreme example and go, okay, let's talk about physical stuff when it comes to working out. And like when you were an infant, you weren't doing much, right? You were crying and you're pooping. You've progressed from there. You can walk, you go to the bathroom in an actual bathroom, you do it multiple times a day without any hoopla, right? And you don't cheer it, you don't celebrate it because it's just the norm. And so, with that self critic that we have that's trying to evaluate, it's trying to keep us moving forward, it's trying to keep us progressing. But if it's too loud or too harsh, it can actually demotivate us and make us feel like we're having no progress. And I will fully admit that part of the reason why I'm thinking about this topic is because I just finished a marathon today, and I did an ultra a month ago, basically to the day, which was probably two back to back of doing an ultra and then a marathon. Although people have done crazier stuff, people have done marathons day after day, which honestly, having my legs hurt the way that they do, that have new appreciation for how difficult that would be to try to do a marathon again tomorrow. That would be pretty insane. Oh, we have a question. My question is how to handle being aware of past trauma and how to change behavior we use for years to live. This is a great question. Okay. Um, my question, how to handle being aware of the past trauma and how to change behavior we used for years to live. So, first off, it's a great framing that you're aware that the habits, behavior was coping. So giving yourself that acceptance, that grace, like that insight is actually the first step, is being able to say, look, I did have these habits that are no longer useful, but there was a time that they really were useful for me. And so, and it's the same thing with, like I was talking about with the self-critic, is understanding first and foremost as you're trying to have a conversation with the self-critic that it's not your enemy, nor are these behaviors necessarily your enemy. They just might be more exaggerated than is useful now, right? You might be having that instinct because it's full, too grown, right? Those neurons are too quick to fire. That muscle is pulling you in that one direction, and you need to balance it out. Okay. So if you're looking at the mouse going through a maze and trying to get to the cheese at the end, the first time it goes through that maze, it's sniffing, all around, and it's looking at one corner, and then it'll go back a little bit, and then it's looking at another corner. It's mapping it out in its mind, and it's super curious. And every time you put that mouse in the same maze, it's going to do that less and less until it goes straight for the cheese. And there's a reason why we do this, not just mice, but people too, right? With efficiency, because the brain takes a lot of calories. Working the brain takes a lot of effort. And so anytime we could reduce the demand on the brain, we're going to try to do that. And these habits then become deeper and deeper ingrained until we do it like this, and we don't even realize we did it without thinking about it, right? And so the simple answer is that as we're trying to go from we did it like this without even thinking about it to we're forming new habits and doing things differently, is that we have to go slower. If you're in a moment of crisis, and we could talk about that question if you wanted to, but what can you do in those moments of crisis where your emotions are triggers and the habit is starting to go to the negative? How do you create that space? But if you're doing it like with that speed, you're going to default to negative habits automatically. You have to slow down and get curious again. Stop going for the cheese. And so that's one of the questions, is what is your metaphorical cheese, right? What are you trying to get to? If it's a place of safety, right? What does that actually look like, and what does that mean? If it's a resolution, why is that resolution really that important? Getting really curious to dig into your motivation can help you examine your behavior and then find different routes to it, where you go, oh, I've been going after this so focused that it's actually not helpful, and I need to remap the maze, right? And so give yourself a lot of grace and space in that process and slow it down as much as you can, would be my main advice. How do we reflect in a way to know if something is too much? For example, can trying to be healthy become an unhealthy obsession? Okay, I think you're saying that because you're accusing me, and now I'm going to respond defensively. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, it can, and yes, I have. Yes, like 100%. I was thinking of you as an example of maybe he's unhealthy because he's too healthy. So, one of the things I just said about the other question was about the getting that curiosity, and especially of our motivations, can be really helpful. So, like, are you trying so hard to be healthy because you don't feel like you're enough? As it says in the great movie Cool Runnings, if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. You go for psychological wisdom from Cool Runnings, but it's there. If you, but I feel like we can gaslight ourselves on our motives too. Yeah, sure. So that goes back to safety thing, right? You got to give yourself permission to go slow enough to be curious, to look at different motivations and accept. And well, so maybe this is a good nuance that I should explain. It's not like your motivations are good or bad. Yeah, Jamaica's got a bobsled team. That's the feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme. Come on now, it's bobsled time. Um, Great movie. It's underappreciated classic for sure. So the gaslighting ourselves and our own motivations. When we're gaslighting ourselves on our motivations, it's partly because we're probably thinking too much in a binary of like, we either are motivated because of this way or motivated that. Like if you're trying to do a check, is my motivation right? Okay, then I'm okay, right? That's probably the wrong way to look at it. There's going to be good and bad motivations, and accepting that all of those like at the same time, and looking at all of those motivations, the good, here's the good part, here's the bad part, right? And then if I notice that there's a bunch of that bad part showing up, it's like, oh, I got to deal with that. Why is that an internal motivator that keeps showing up? And how can I process through it? And then if there's a good motivator that's showing up, but like way too often because it's not balanced, this goes back to that whole being healthy becomes too much of an obsession, that even if it's like I'm over focusing on that, okay, so why am I over focusing on that and what's going on there? Right? Because what we're trying to get to is this based on our core design of who we're meant to be and who we live at our best, or is this a product of our wounds? Yeah, and safety, it's like it's hard to say when safety is the answer. Yeah, absolutely, it definitely helps it, but then it's like, okay, but there are a couple problems. One, we're not always control of when we're safe, and then two, if we grew up in trauma, the wires of when we are safe are probably going to be crossed. And I've mentioned this before. Don't call out clients, but my dad, I get to call him out for some things. He was in a very tough childhood environment, and a long, long time ago, right? Like, I'm not saying he's old, but it wasn't recently that he was a child. He raised me since then, and yet still he sometimes gets really anxious about little things. And it occurred to me actually even this year to start saying, Dad, you're safe. Everyone loves you. Everything's okay. Right? You're totally safe. And watch as he's and then he starts to act, more rational. He starts to take more time to be, more, curious and not get in that instinctual anxious place about really nothing. It's like trying to get mom to her gym class on time. And mom's like, oh, I don't even care about that. I can miss the gym class. What do I care? But he's just still from that hardwired nervousness that happened in childhood. And so catching that and then going, all right, I'm safe now. It's like when he was, and I never asked details, but the heart has reason that reason doesn't know. One of my favorite quotes. There might be things with being on time that date back to his childhood development, that it's hardwired that he has to be on time or he's going to be unsafe. Me too. You're not alone. I think we have all fallen into it at times. That anxiety of needing to be on time, or I'm not sure what it is. Unfortunately, there's always a little delay on the forum to try to respond to the thing. But yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I had childhood trauma that got me there. I think that there's also this other thing that we focus a lot on trauma, and partly because it draws a an easier picture than culture. But culture has arguably as big an influence or bigger than trauma. So what I mean by that is that, like, you might have one traumatic incident that really affects you and the way you think about things, but most of your limiting beliefs are actually more a product and reflection or reaction to your culture. So the cultural influence might actually be more significant. So if you grew up in a home that was like, oh, we have to be on time, it might not have been traumatic at all, but it might be an issue that's not balanced anymore in your life. And this is kind of giving me on a tangent, but you guys aren't asking super a lot of questions. So we only got a couple people on the forum. So, but when diagnosis is only, this is one of the things I think I want to like reiterate again and again so people understand. Diagnosis is only supposed to be for mental health when it's maladaptive. In other words, when people are actually suffering because of it. So if you have, for instance, autism spectrum disorder because you've been diagnosed with it, but you say autism spectrum disorder is my superpower, then you don't have autism spectrum disorder. Because if it's not maladaptive for you, you don't have a disorder. It has to be disordered to be a disorder. If it's autism spectrum order, because you're functioning perfectly well in society and with others, and so a caveat on that, like, there might be somebody who's perfectly happy as a schizophrenic, but they're not functioning well in society. So the negative influence is on that, right? But it's just important to understand that that's how we should look at our diagnosis. And diagnosis also in mental health is to guide treatment. But all that to say is that even that super needing to be on time or you're freaking out, if it's causing disorder for you or your relationships, we don't have to get into it's a diagnosis, but it's not healthy. And we want to process through, okay, what happened that allowed that to happen? And how do we reframe that, reform that, and develop new habits that allow for, as ACT would say, acceptance commitment therapy, psychological flexibility, because that's really where we find the best mental health, is when people can be psychologically flexible, different in different contexts. What is manic depression? So bipolar is what traditionally people think about when it's like the manic and depressive as these two different episodes. So manic is like, I can take on the world and everything is wonderful and I have all this energy. Meanwhile, again, it's a disorder too. So it's like you're not actually necessarily functioning as well as you think you're functioning. Not that I know, but I've heard this might be a little bit like if somebody's on crack cocaine, just going all over the place and they think they're, coming up with something genius, but it's really just nonsense. Gulp. And obviously depression is really a numbness. It's not just sadness, it's withdrawing. So it's with that lethargy here, right? So what is manic depression? So you can actually have where you're manic on your depression, if that's what you mean. I don't know if you're referring to bipolar as manic and depressive as sort of different episodes, but you can be where you're basically super hectic and anxious and going all over the place with your depression as a coping mechanism, because your mind thinks that if it stops moving, you're going to fall into despair. And this is where there's a nuance here of like knowing when to trust that your emotions, when given room, will do what they need to do for you to be healthy. So allowing yourself to just feel, allowing yourself to journal, allowing yourself to go through the emotions and trusting that on the other side, you're actually going to be a healthier version of you, is one of the biggest pivot points for people's mental health. So the moment people do that, they start to live a healthier life. Is there anything, diagnosis situation, you have been like interested in counseling but haven't gotten the opportunity? So I haven't actually counseled someone with dissociative identity disorder. I have talked to somebody with identity disorder and dissociative identity disorder. I've talked to people. I think that, so I have a theory that even dissociative identity disorder is a spectrum too. And everybody's got a little bit of it. So with dissociative identity disorder, you go through something so traumatic that the different aspects of your personality actually split. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. They split into their own personas that sometimes the client isn't even aware of. That is exceedingly rare. But it is very common that people have these different parts of their personality that they take on, where they're like all of a sudden the protector, right? And did this I'm sorry, I just think it's funny that the acronym, I know what you mean, it's DID versus bipolar disorder, or I mean borderline personality disorder, but it just looks like did visited did visited I think dis visited. Yes, it did. That's my answer to that question. So how is dissociative identity disorder different from bipolar disorder? So bipolar or borderline personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder is on, this is his original name, is on the borderline between schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, and then like anxiety and depression. So there's like mood disorders, and then there are personality disorders, and on the borderline of those is borderline personality disorder. That's kind of changed a little bit how they talk about it, but it's specifically people that are like bipolar having manic and depression, but they like can change back at a moment's notice. So it's more mood focused with their personality aspect. So there is a disassociation, but it's an emotional disassociation, not an identity dissociation. Whereas dissociative identity disorder, they're actually retreating into different personalities. But I actually would, going back to that whole, I think that there's a form of that everybody has, is that could be a good example of like, okay, so let's say somebody gets in this like manic protective mode where they're kind of a jerk, for lack of a better word, when they're like that. And then, or a depressive mode when they're like, oh, everybody hates me, woe is me, right? And they go back and forth. That even though it wouldn't technically be clinically disassociation of identity disorder, they don't have distinct personalities. They do have these two very distinct ways of being that flip back and forth because they're not integrated. And so like this is true for shadow work when it comes to the parts of our personality we don't like. This comes from dissociative identity disorder. This comes to a lot of different things, is that our goal is not to eliminate aspects of our personality, but kind of get them to play nice, get them to get along, get them to not so disassociative, right? We want to associate the identities to disorder. So I do a little bit of aspects with certain clients on this kind of stuff, but I think it'd be really fun to have somebody that actually is at the extreme of disassociation and working with them on how we can get them to associate those different personalities and aspects. It's exceedingly rare, so it's not super common that I would have a client that has that, but that would be an interesting counseling thing that I haven't had the opportunity to do. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I actually haven't, because I keep thinking of different things and then I'm thinking I've either done that or I have no interest in doing that. And honestly, like the no interest in doing that, I'll be honest, like there are counselors out there that are really good at child therapy, and I am not wanting to do that. So I will, that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. So if they're like teenagers, that's fine. But like under teenagers, I'm going to probably refer them to a specialist that really is an expert with working with children, because there's some therapists that when I watch them work with kids and they're just so talented at it, and that's what they can do so well. I'm happy to not be that guy. Kids can be complicated. I lived with my mother, who had borderline personality disorder. I'm assuming she had different personality wait, did she have borderline personality disorder or bipolar? So I'm not sure if she had different personalities, multiple personalities. It's really chaotic when you have somebody who's got that as a mother. Both. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's tough. And in that, you're kind of thrown into the chaos with them. And so finding places goes all the way back to like when you said it was all about safety. It is like, okay, finding ways to now reparent and realize that you are safe, or when you are safe, right? And look at, and so when you are safe, I go back to pattern recognition for that. Okay, so can I look at the patterns in people's lives, that they are people that have consistent long-term friendships, whatever. So I say relationships, people think romantic, but I'm saying any kind of relationships. They've got those healthy patterns. They're putting their things in order, right? Those are the people that I want to put my trust in and realize I can be safe with. And then, kind of reprogram some of the chaos. Because when you're a kid, you don't know any other option. I mean, it's one of those sad realities that people form many of their worldviews at a time where their brain is not fully developed. And so yet we walk around very confident in those worldviews and not even questioning them. And in the process of therapy, we go through and reparent. We go and not just the therapist with the client, but even the client with themselves, of going, it's like one of the simplest therapeutic methods that you get. I mean, this is known fairly well, but you get so much mileage out of like, what would a happy, healthy version of you say? What if you were a parent? What would you say to your child if they said what you just said? Right. And then people can, see that and actually reparent themselves in a way that helps them stabilize. Can you talk about jealousy in relationships, some like insecurities, trust issues, instance, it's good, okay, working through it, etc. Beth was talking about that in her workshop. Kids fill in gaps they don't understand, and it comes out years later. Yeah, you're going back to what I was saying in there thing. Yeah, and it's like interesting how much we create a story that then we keep alive for sometimes the rest of our lives, because we're just so convinced that this is reality. We see it everywhere, and that's one of the cruel realities about it, the way the human mind works. Okay, so jealousy in relationships. Can I talk about jealousy in relationships? Yes. So it's a vicious cycle that turns into a negative feedback loop if you're not careful. Here's my go-to example. So like if you're insecure and you're, for instance, I'm going to use a really silly example, not silly, but like a pretty small example that comes up a lot. So like you go out to dinner a lot, and you say, let's say the female partner is convinced that the male partner is checking out people. You just look at her butt, right? And then talking about that girl's butt, right? Which now has the guys mind go to the butt, right? This is the vicious cycle thing. It's like you spotlighted the negative behavior. And so the first thing that has to happen in a relationship where there's insecurity and jealousy is to have the conversation as it is, right? It's got to be about the insecurity, not about the thing that triggered it. So it's one thing if the person's made agreements that they've already decided, although I think some relationships have made agreements till they're paralyzed because they've agreed to like all these things that they're not going to do because they trigger insecurities in the other person, and they have less and less freedom and are more and more miserable. When instead what we want is an open conversation of the insecurity. And so that's in that example, the woman would have to be like, look, I'm feeling really insecure right now. You don't have to even mention the waitress that you are convinced he's checking out, but just that you are having feelings of insecurity, and have it where that's okay, right? And he can respond with affirmation. So, one of the phrases I say is affirmation, not information, right? We're not focusing on digging down to what caused the insecurity and make that the spotlight. That's going to be actually counterproductive long term. So when it comes to any habit in our mind, the more attention we give it, the more it spreads. So you have all these relationships where people are giving all of this information and then expecting there's going to be more and more trust, and there's actually less and less trust because your solution is information, right? It's going to be, okay, now we've reinforced that I feel insecure and you give me information. This is going to be bad on both partners. You're so smart. You like someone on the show name the tune you do, even that know the show. You're so smart. You're like someone on the show. Name that tune. Do you even know the show? Name that tune. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't. But I appreciate the compliment. We all have our areas. Mental health is one that I hope is one of mine. I try to focus on that. But anyway, so going through these patterns of insecurity, I'm trying to keep checking on the chat just to make sure I'm going the right direction in this. And you can tell me if I'm answering the question in the way that you were hoping I was, or at least addressing the subject that you're hoping. Right? We got to start, not that the person is the problem is the problem, but insecurity is the problem, right? Not what spawned the insecurity. And look, nope, it's all wrong. Great. Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, then direct me what you are asking about. I've definitely made the mistake where I started blaming someone else for my insecurities. Like, I've definitely done that. And then when I, like, not just to them, I actually internally thought they're making me feel insecure. But when I look back, I figured you were kidding. When I look back, I realized, oh, I actually had those insecurities still before I met that person. So logically, it wasn't actually them creating my insecurities. But then here's the thing. Can you talk about those insecurities and have the reaction be acceptance of vulnerability, even encouragement of vulnerability, not defensiveness? And so that's part of the problem of that negative feedback loop is it turns into an accusation, then the person responds defensively, and then they're in a fight. And at the end of that fight, there's usually a less intimacy. So what I mean by less intimacy is I mean less of a willingness and desire to share about what's going on internally. So if you win an argument, even let's say you win the argument and your partner walks away going, well, I'm never going to share that again because it came at such a high cost, they realize it's not worth it. So they just decided not to share. You lose, right? Like not just you, the relationship loses, right? You've kind of doomed that relationship for the price of victory. What we want is people to be open and be able to share, hey, this is one of the things that I'm insecure. Okay, I totally understand that. Like, or I don't understand that, but I'd love to know more about it. Help me understand why that's such a deep insecurity for you. And is there a way that I could affirm that? Like, is there a way I could support that? And like, then if it's boundaries, and I'm not saying that there aren't ever where it gets to like specific, like objective behavioral boundaries, we just got to make sure that they're not paralyzing to what the person actually values most in their life, because we want people happy. Happy, it's like they say, used to say happy wife, happy life, right? Now they don't say that, I guess, because nobody's happy. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but looking at those, your partner, if they're not happy in their life because they're not able to do the stuff. So I won't say who this is. I'll just give you the name, Jack. My friend Jack came up to me and he goes, "Man, my wife was the worst." He was divorced, and he said, "My wife was the worst. I couldn't even bowl." And my response was, "What, was she like a very strong woman, that she was very violent and aggressive?" And he goes, "No, what do you mean? I don't understand." I was like, "I'm just trying to understand how she prevented you from bowling." And he goes, "Well, she told me I couldn't do it." It's like, oh, yeah. And then he goes, "Wait, I could bowl the whole time?" And it's like, yeah, if bowling is important to you, then you've got to do the bowling. Like, now, nuance matters here. There are times that you compromise for your relationship. But in my communication class, I'll never forget, my communication teacher or professor said, any relationship built on compromise is doomed to fail. And I actually gave a standing ovation at that moment, because I immediately knew where she was going. And everyone else looked confused, mostly because I was standing and clapping randomly in the class. But it's that you've got to have win-wins in relationships. And win-wins happen when you're being very specific. So getting down to what is that emotional root, what's really going on, what do you really need, helps you come up with win-wins. Being vulnerable is so hard to walk through to the other side. Yeah, it is. Especially when we've been, well, speaking of gaslighting, when we've been gaslit, when we've been, uh, when people take those insecurities and they respond defensively to it, like every time you express your vulnerability, they take it as a personal attack, when you're just trying to be open and real about what's going on internally. That makes it really hard. When you're part of a family that had either emotional chaos or, arguably worse, emotional stuffing, where it was like, we don't talk about those things, right? Because then you've not developed the habits of vulnerability. But man, when you are able to be vulnerable in someone else's presence, and they don't even have to have the solution in mind, if they just are able to be there for you, it is so healing. It's game changing. So when all of a sudden, if the person is just able to just be there and you experience that vulnerability and it's never held against you. Okay, and then that's a big one. I'm glad I thought of that one too, because I would say we are absolutely shooting ourselves in the foot if we want to ever be in a healthy relationship and somebody shares something vulnerable and then we use it against them later because we had like an argument or a fight, and we start using, then they're never going to share with us again. And I've seen that pattern, had that pattern happen to me, and it's terrible. When somebody shares vulnerable, it's like I'm never going to use that against them. you know I saw a thing recently of a lawyer who talked about he rarely sees divorces in marriages when prenups in his, and his hypothesis. Oh, okay. I'm bad at reading. This is not you, it's me. um his prenups and his hypothesis was because they had already really good at communicating boundaries in pre-marriage. Yeah, no, I absolutely think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it fits the pattern with everything. So, like, if I have a couples counseling meeting and before I go into before I get into it, I set the ground rules and I say, like, here's how this is going to work. Now, this might happen. If this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. This is how, and then I go, is that all agreeable to everybody? And they go, yeah. Those sessions go so much better when we just start into things. And they're like, when it comes up, we'll deal with it. Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. Right. So, like, actually going through of, like, I mean, some of the most successful couples I know, their first date was all of the reason why the other person would walk away. Here are all my worst habits, the things that I think are, deal breakers for most people that I do, the things that I'm bad at, the things that in my past that I struggle with. Like, here's who I am at my worst. Sound good? Yeah, I think I can deal with that. Okay, cool. Now here's all the other person did the same thing. And, I've had multiple people that I knew did that. And those are some of the most successful relationships ever. One, you're getting in a relationship with somebody who is self-aware, if they actually know what's going on with them, but also you've got that ahead. So then when it happens, you're not surprised. And going back to that vulnerability thing, it's easier to not have it be an accusation when you know the person that you got in a relationship with is someone that struggles with that vulnerability. So having it said right off the bat is like, hey, just so you know, if you want to get in a relationship with me, I get super jealous if I don't have somebody spend enough time with me because I'm a really time focused person. And then I'm going to be like, my question is, what does that mean specifically? Right. And the more we can quantify that, the better. Tell people what you want. I know Gia's gonna know what I'm talking about with some of this stuff, but like even like down to birthdays, everybody has a birthday in November in the world, all around the 15th. But like with people's birthdays and stuff, yeah, it's like we don't have to have it be a guessing game. Just shout out what you want, right? We're adults, and don't assume that if people give you what you want, it's because they now felt obligated and they didn't really love you. No, they did it for a reason. They do love you, right? But here's the scary part. What if you tell them what you want and then you don't get it? That's what I think we're most afraid of. So we avoid that by not even telling people what we want. And guess what? We set ourselves up for failure. There's so many things that we set ourselves up for failure for. Same with going on the first date and catfishing the crap out of that person, right? Put the best foot forward. It's like, no, let's put best foot forward. Just put the foot right in the mouth. And then if somebody still wants to have a second date with you, they're going to deal with the real you, and you might have a chance at a real relationship. But let's be honest, most of you are pretty good at putting your foot in the mouth, right? And it's going to happen at a certain point in a relationship. And how are they going to respond to that? So, like, just go off right off the bat, right off the rip. Just put your foot right in your mouth. All right. Birthdays. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not mad. Is it a birthday response? I think we might be getting too specific, but I'm not actually sure what you mean. I think I'll try that in my next marriage. Is just put the foot right in the mouth right off the bat. Yeah. It's like, well, and I do think that in relationships, having grace for people at their worst is probably a bigger factor than anything else. So there's no guarantees in relationships. Relationships are hard, but being somebody who is aware of what the person is at their worst, and that that you can handle that, because if you can't, then there's going to be an eventual end to the relationship, because it's like at a certain point we are going to be at our worst. I always do. I'm not sure what you mean. You always you always ask Gia, or you saying ask Gia what you always do? Anyway, so at a certain point, you're going to be at your lowest. And are you going to have a partner who can be there and support you in that? you know, and that looks different for different, in different situations, so I mean at different times and seasons. And that's one of the things that's hard about relationships too, because you could be different as you go. Like I still definitely get low, but I used to go through like seasons of depression. And if I didn't have a partner that knew how to just be there and be okay with me going through that season of depression, like if they were trying to fix it, or they'd get mad at me for being sad, or they'd personalize it as like their fault that they're being sad. It's good to be back. Yeah. What are those blue things in my driveway? Side note. But anyway, uh, he was referring to the Chili's moment. Oh, the foot in the mouth. Yes. Oh, that makes sense. It's all coming together. Yeah, definitely. Victor knows how to put his foot in his mouth, and needs to be with somebody that's okay with him sometimes just saying stuff. I was just teasing about the blue tub thing. It's fine. I don't care. So all that to say, um, getting right off the bat in that vulnerability and practicing it. One of my favorite. So I used to do a group therapy, and I had one of the guys here. We were all picking what exercise we were going to do based on the discussion, to try to continue to have momentum when it came to our mental health goals. So I had people pick their own, and he couldn't think of anything. And so he says, "You choose for me." And he regretted that choice for sure, because I went, "Okay, then I want you to tell your wife when you feel weak." So you're going to start, "I feel weak when." And he was immediately like, "Oh no." Because it was a vulnerability exercise, and a pretty tough one, right? I feel weak when. But thankfully he has a good wife. So he ended up feeling more free afterwards, right? Because when he shared that vulnerability, she was able to be there for him. And what happened? Intimacy increased in their relationship. And so that's one of the things that you got to see, that pattern recognition of knowing when you can be there for people. And honestly, if somebody can't be there for you when you are expressing vulnerability, I'm not going to say anything dynamic of like, get out of that relationship, but it's just like that is a big, not great sign. Okay. That's not a green light. That's a red. Oh, speaking of which, red flag, not red flare. Okay. Let's not get our signals crossed. You see a bright thing in the sky and you think, oh, someone is crying for help. No, that's a flag. It's not a flare. Run the other, yeah, walk away, run the other direction. Don't pursue it going, here I come to save the day. Of course, I've never made that mistake in my life. Oh, even Ripley was like, what? Yeah, she knows. She knows. All right. So, do we have any more questions? Because I think I kind of wrapped up that relationship thing fairly well. If not, biggest red flags? What are the biggest red flags? Gosh, that's a broad question. I mean, I'm facetiously kind of wanting to answer this as literal of my analytical brain of like all of the things that indicate somebody but might be a serial killer as the biggest red flags. But in terms of most common big red flags that you see show up in relationships a lot, yeah, so definitely can't be vulnerable is a great one. But more, I would say, their values don't align. So specifically like vulnerability, there you do not have serial killer vibes, okay? But with vulnerability, if they don't desire vulnerability, That's the thing more than anything, right? It's not only that they just can't be vulnerable, they don't even want it. And there are a lot of people that's the point that they're at. Now, I don't think they're usually the healthiest people in the world, but like if you're somebody who really desires to have emotional connection and you see somebody that doesn't want to be vulnerable and doesn't think it's worth their time or healthy, that is a huge red flag because people are, people grow, people change, but they rarely go against their values. So if you have incompatible values for really key things like that, it's a huge red flag, right? If the ideal version of you and the ideal version of them is doing completely different things, this is not a healthy relationship. So going all the way back to that whole a relationship based on compromise is doomed to fail, is that if you can't find win-wins in your relationship with how you're doing things, with what you're doing, with who you are, this is a red flag and it means walk away. What if you can't walk away from the red flags? Is it because I'm too invested in the relationship? It could be. It could also be because of a lack of self-regard for yourself, or because you're, struggling with limiting beliefs. Like there could be a lot of internal mechanisms that are worth exploring that are holding you in that relationship. And one of the things I say to people, and I believe this, and this comes up, and I think it's very true, is the best people are the worst at ending relationships, even when they should. Because we are designed for connection, and we're designed for that connection to go till death do us part. And so the most loyal people, the most loving people, they want to keep people around. Healthy people want to keep people around. So it's really hard when those people see these red flags and know they probably need to walk away, but they just feel like they can't. And so giving yourself some grace is the first step, but then realizing what's the internal mechanism and that long term it's not going to work. You can even say it on the reverse person, right? They deserve to be with somebody who's like 100% in and convinced. And so that might be worth exploring too. But I would say try not to go back and forth. Try to slowly, deeply process and then make the right intentional steps. Because when you get to that back and forth, it's really hard with how chaotic it is. Does that make sense? I tend to struggle with that, I think, because I don't want to hurt people, so I don't leave. I just want to try to fix it. Yeah, yeah. And it's like, where is that line? Because some relationships can be fixed. When do you know? Man, that's really hard. Um, and I don't have a definitive answer of this is when. So it's like doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity, people say. But it's also the definition of perseverance. It's also the definition of practice. And like, what's the difference? Long term, we might be able to tell, but short term, we can't. And circumstances can make big differences. Time frames can make big differences. Like different things can change. So we can just be like holding on to that little bit of hope that maybe things are going to be different. And maybe they will. Right? So that's why I say long internal processing, making sure and not going back and forth, because then what ends up happening is there's less and less safety. So there's more and more instability. People react more and more. And even, well, let's just say it takes two people to make a relationship work, but it only takes one person to destroy it. So you got to make sure that you have somebody who's willing to work with you and they have the same values of where they want to work it. As a counselor, when you think someone should leave, do you usually tell them? So one of the things I love about counseling is my opinion on the relationship, or even really how the person's living their lives or their values doesn't normally even play into it. And I'm a big proponent in not making decisions or telling people and then having them make the decision because you said that, because they've got to own it. And when you have somebody in therapy telling you about their partner, you get like one aspect of that, and it usually doesn't give you the whole picture. Now, that's general, and there are specific examples that I can think of that might be different. But the next person wrote, "What about your own self-worth?" Excuse me. And that's actually more what I focus on counseling. So, like, if it's very evident the person should leave them, they don't need my opinion that they should leave them. They don't need me to be like, dude, you need to leave. Have I ever said it? Yeah, I've said I don't think this relationship is going to work. But more often I would say something like, let's be realistic about the ideal scenario of what could happen, right? Here's best case. And then I'm realistic best case, as a therapist of where they could get to, and they go, well, that sounds terrible. And it's like, okay, then you don't want this relationship because the best case is not even something that you want. The best realistic case, you're living in a fantasy, the person's just going to change. And this is what change actually looks like. Because it's like people do change, but at a very slow rate, and they have to have willingness. But going back to that whole self-worth thing, if somebody's in like a toxic relationship where the person's being abusive, I'm going to be focusing more on that person's self-worth than anything else, because when their self-worth is good, they will leave the person on their own. They won't need me to tell them to. So if I have somebody that's in a extremely negative relationship, that's what we focus on in therapy. I have told clients, though, not that I think they should leave someone. I just say, I think you need to be realistic about the chance of this relationship being successful or something like that. Now, as a pastor, I've told people in premarital counseling they shouldn't get married, and none of them listened. They all did it anyway. That's what it is. They all got divorced too. Every couple that I've ever said, I don't think you should get married, ended up getting divorced. So right now I have at least, not that every relationship I thought would work has, but every relationship that I thought was not going to work did not. At a certain point, you just have to accept that who they are and decide what level of relationship you have with them, if at all. Yeah, acceptance is the healthiest and the strongest thing. Like, if we can get better at just applying that self-acceptance thing, and not just self-acceptance, but acceptance of them, those are going to be much healthier relationship. Like this, but then again, so this is where, like, if you accept this is who the person is and that's who they're going to be, do you want to be in a relationship with that person? And if the answer is no, then okay, well, don't, because there might be somebody who does, right? That you're actually preventing them from being in that relationship. If you can, great. Then stop trying to force it into the box that you think would be slightly preferable. But like, nuance matters. And this is one that, like, with relationship stuff, it's where we can look at stupid reels on Instagram that confirm exactly as we say, or talk to chat GDP and have it validate everything we want to say. But it really helps working with a therapist on specific stuff with that if you're trying to make those decisions, because every relationship is different and a dynamic between two people. So, all right, with that said, we are at the time. So I appreciate you guys who are very active in the questions. I thought it was a good chat, and hopefully it helps people. So forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Yeah. I'm in the season with my relationship, accepting. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a good thing to be accepting. Yep. All right, guys. Have a good night. Love you too. Love you all.